Sometimes fishermen come across more than just fish, like a mummified sailor still sitting at his desk, a one-eyed shark pulled from another shark's belly, or watching as a strange man gets struck by lightning and then vanishes, all in a day's work. These are disturbing discoveries made by fishermen. Back in 2016, a group of fishermen off the coast of the Philippines spotted a white yacht just drifting out in the open sea. The sails were half torn and there were no signs of life. They figured it was probably best to check it out, see if anyone needed help. They boarded the boat, began taking a look around, and unfortunately there was no one on board. No one alive, that is. Sitting at a desk in the cabin was the body of a man, still in place like he'd just been working on something. Sunglasses still on, one arm reaching toward the radio. He was eerily well preserved, essentially mummified. The guy was eventually identified as Manfred Fritz Bajeret, a German sailor who'd apparently been living on the water for years. Nobody knows exactly how long the boat had been floating around, but the conditions at sea, heat, dry air, and salt, kept his body strangely preserved. The autopsy showed that he died from a heart attack. They say he'd been sailing solo since his wife passed away a few years earlier. Next up, we have the albino Cyclops Shark. That sounds like a cryptid, but no, this is real, or at least was real. Back in 2011, this odd creature was sliced from the belly of a pregnant mama dusky shark. It had been caught by a commercial fisherman in the Gulf of California. The little guy was dead when they found it, and odds are it wouldn't have made it anyway, but scientists took a closer look and confirmed that it was real, fully developed and made of legit optical tissue. It wasn't just some weird bulge or mutation. This was an actual eye. They ended up preserving it in a lab, and the photos of it quickly made the rounds online. People couldn't believe that this was real, but it was. A shark expert named Felipe Galvan Magnana said stuff like this is incredibly rare, with fewer than 50 known cases. The condition is called cyclopia, and it's happened in humans too, like a baby girl in Israel who was born with one eye and no nose back in 1982. There's also a pretty famous case of a kitten born in 2006 with one eye and also no nose. This next story is incredibly bizarre. From a now deleted Reddit user comes the story of the lightning strike. When I was 13 to 14, my brother participated in fishing tournaments, and he had to train every weekend, so sometimes me and my dad went with him to nearby lakes and rivers. Neither me or my dad could fish, so it was usually pretty boring. We couldn't talk for hours, otherwise fish got scared, and oftentimes we had to stand in the pouring rain. This one time in September, my brother was fishing in this river bend in the middle of nowhere. It was cloudy and thundering, and we were expecting rain soon. About 3 hours in, we saw a figure in the distance approaching. He looked like an adult man, dark jumper and jeans, and he carried what seemed to be a collapsed rod. The weird thing is, he didn't have a basket or anything, just the rod. We watched as he positioned himself about 600 meters away from us and unfolded the rod to full 7 meters. From the way it bent, I would have guessed it was a carbon fiber. He just stood there motionless. A few minutes later, a lightning bolt shot down from the sky and hit the rod. We heard this loud noise like wood splintering. We rushed over to see if he was okay, but we found no one. A man got hit by lightning and disappeared. Back in December of 2022, someone out magnet fishing in Kentucky pulled something a little more intense than what they were used to finding. Just a live grenade, and not a hand grenade though. This was the kind you'd fire from a grenade launcher. They were dropping their magnet off a bridge when they snagged it, and once they realized what they were dealing with, the police were called in. Cops shut down the bridge and surrounding roads while a bomb squad rolled in from Fort Campbell. Turns out the grenade was still live, and because it had been sitting in the water for who knows how long, it was way too unstable to move, so instead of risking it, they detonated it right there on the spot. The blast was loud enough that people all over town heard it. Police ended up putting out a statement just to let everyone know what had actually happened. As for how the thing ended up in the water to begin with, nobody knows. Speaking of explosives though, in November of 2024, a Dutch dredging vessel working off the coast of the Netherlands ended up pulling something way heavier than expected from the North Sea. It was a 2,000-pound US aerial bomb from World War II. It was still very much intact and packed with explosives. Basically, someone on board noticed the thing wedged into the equipment, and once they realized what they were looking at, they got the military involved immediately. The Dutch Defense Explosive Ordnance Disposal Service, or EOD, was called to the scene. They took over from there and managed to safely detonate the explosive. The whole thing was handled professionally, but yeah, pretty unsettling to think that for a few minutes, that crew was just going about their day with a live World War II explosive that could have gone off at any minute. This isn't exactly rare either. The North Sea is still full of leftover explosives and all kinds of junk from the war, and every once in a while, fishermen or construction crews get unlucky and find something like this stuck in their nets or gear. What would you do if you found a decomposing body while out fishing in a river? A Redditor by the name of Sherback had this to say. My friend told me about how he was fishing at a lake where he saw some bones that looked like a ribcage of some kind of animal. He thought it was a deer or something, but then he noticed a towel over the head, so he lifted it up and it turned out to be a person. There was still flesh on the head because the towel somewhat preserved it, but the rest of the body was mostly bone. He took some photos of it and reported it. He was questioned by the FBI for about 2 hours. Turns out it was a little girl, but he never found out anything else about the case. Fast forward 2 years later, and this same friend is fishing along a bank late at night when he hears two Spanish-speaking men approach, saying something along the lines of, "I'm going to show you how to do it so you know next time. Nobody will ever catch up." Followed by a loud splash in the water. Since it was very dark, they didn't know he was there. He was super still and quiet, not to alert them. When they left, though, he reported what he presumed was the dumping of a body. He had to go back to the same FBI building, and they basically said to him, "So 2 years ago, you found a dead body and now you're back?" The Redditor then went on to say that his friend never found out any more details about the case, but wow, that is some serious courage. Reporting two separate bodies in a river while out on a casual fishing trip, that would make you seem pretty suspicious. In September of 2021, two kayakers were paddling along the Minnesota River when they came across something pretty disturbing: a partial human skull. There had been a drought, so the bone was easier to see sticking out of the riverbank. Now, there was also an active missing persons case going on at the time, and authorities thought that this skull may have belonged to them. They handed it over to the Midwest Medical Examiner's office, and eventually the FBI got involved. After some forensic analysis, turned out this was not a fresh skull. It belonged to a young man, but one who had died a very, very long time ago. This guy was roaming the earth around 5,500 and 6,000 BC, making this skull about 8,000 years old. It had a noticeable depression, looked like he'd suffered some kind of blunt force trauma. Since 2007, random human feet have been washing up on the shores of British Columbia and Washington State, still in sneakers. Just feet though, no body. It's exactly as weird as it sounds. It started out with 1 foot, then another one showed up not long after, and another. As of now, there have been over 20 separate feet found. Most of them are right feet as well. Some match each other, most don't. Naturally, people started freaking out. Was there a serial killer lurking around? Was there organ trafficking going on? Well, according to authorities, most of the feet seem to belong to people who were either in accidents or went missing, but no foul play, supposedly. The theory is that when a body ends up in the water, it can break apart over time. Sneakers, especially modern ones, float, so the feet just drift in. That being said, it still doesn't totally explain why they keep turning up in that same general area. It's weird. It's just creepy. And while the cops say there's nothing to worry about, it doesn't really detract from how grim this is. Every so often, something absolutely disgusting washes up on a beach and no one knows what the hell it is. I'm not talking about feet here. I'm talking about mystery blobs that have been nicknamed Globsters, and they've shown up all over the world. One of the most famous ones hit Tasmania back in 1960. Locals found this massive lump of flesh on the shore. There were no eyes, no bones, just 6 weird, floppy, arm-looking things and a body covered in what looked like wiry white white hair. Nobody could figure out what it was, so people just started calling it the Tasmanian Globster, and it kinda stuck. But this wasn't the first time something gross like this showed up. Back in 1896, two guys walking on a beach in Florida found a massive rotting thing that looked like it had tentacles. It was so big and so rubbery that people thought it might have been a giant octopus. To this day, it's still called the St. Augustine Monster. And more recently, in 2003, a giant blob washed up in Chile. It was about 40 feet wide and weighed in at about 13 tons. People were tossing out all kinds of guesses, but eventually, DNA tests said it was just a decomposed whale. Kind of a buzzkill, but still, every time one of these things washes up, it just reminds you there's so much of the ocean we haven't seen yet. What the hell else could be down there? Back in October of 2012, a beachcomber named Gino Covacci was taking a stroll along Pompano Beach, Florida, when he came across a big, fleshy ball. He did a double take. No, it couldn't be. It looked like a massive sized eyeball. Well, it turns out it was. A big blue eyeball about the size of a softball, just lying in the sand. When news of the find hit the internet, people had all kinds of wild theories. Was it from a giant squid or some unknown sea creature? Cavacci handed the eyeball over to the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. They sent it off to their research institute in St. Petersburg, and after taking a closer look, they figure it probably belonged to a swordfish. Or used to, I guess is more apt. There were clean cuts around the eye, meaning it had likely been removed by a fisherman and then discarded at sea. With all that said though, I've been your host James, and I'll catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video.